Hey guys, Stealth here. Today talking about the Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts battleships. This is going to be a series of 5 videos on 5 different types of ships and how they relate to the other ships. You see, normally you have sort of this diagram. Generally, this is how the ships relate to each other. The battleship is going to be able to take down the battlecruiser. The battleship generally will also take down the heavy cruiser. The problem is, with light cruisers and destroyers, you won't be able to catch them because they're going to be too fast. Now, battle cruisers are generally really good against heavy cruisers and light cruisers. Heavy cruisers do well against light cruisers and destroyers. But what battleships, for example, don't do very well is fight destroyers. Because they're too small, they're too nimble, and with the right torpedo armament, they can stay at range. So, how do you build out a battleship in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts? Here are some ideas. With this, it is very important to note that it's going to depend quite seriously on what era you have, what sort of battleship you're going to build. Your battleship in 1890, for example, and this is the United States that I'm setting as the standard nation, is going to have a displacement of 11,000 tons. That's the maximum that this battleship can displace in minimum, at maximum 16,000. It's a fairly big ship compared to, for example, the torpedo boat, which later develops into the destroyer. These things only displace 200 to 500 tons. So in 1890, you're looking at a ship that's called a battleship displacing 16,000 tons. If we push this all the way to 1940, you're going to be looking at super battleships. And if I push this up to its full size, you're looking at 109,000 tons. That's without displacing beam and draft. You're going to be looking at 132,513 tons. By comparison, a battle cruiser a heavy cruiser in this era is looking at about 12,700 tons. If you want to go really big, 21,000 tons. So a heavy cruiser in this era is already bigger than a battleship. This means that the battleship in 1890 is going to be vastly different than the one that you're looking at in 1940. So, a battleship in 1890. I'd say build these out mostly to deal with other battleships. The problem with 1890 is that your tech is so bad, you generally won't hit anything. You won't hit anything small either. So, trying to put a lot of relatively smaller guns on it to try and deal with fast small ships, generally not your best idea. Because you won't hit them in time. A destroyer, or in this era a torpedo boat, will still be able to get its torpedoes away. You simply don't want that. So especially in 1890, the battleship doesn't really fulfill the role of tank, I would say. It more fulfills the role of dealing with other battleships. So with that in mind, try and put some fairly big guns on them. As you're doing that, keep an eye on what sort of mark you get. So you can see over here I got X2 12-inch 38, 12-inch being the caliber of the gun, the size of the gun if you will, 38 being the length of the barrels. The longer the barrels are, the more accurate your weapons are going to be, but you're also looking at a downside there because your rate of fire will drop. Mark 1 indicates how advanced this is, let's say what iteration of the weapon this is. In 1890 you'll not have any options. In 1940, you're going to have all sorts of Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, and generally you'll have eventually developed Mark 5. So with these, you can develop really high-end weapons. And the Mark 5 generally is a far cry from the Mark 1, it's vastly better. Now, this goes for destroyers, heavy cruisers, battleships, what have you. Anyway, in 1890, I would build these things out to deal mostly with smaller ships. With the battleships. That means something like an 11-inch or a 12-inch. You're going to have to use double barrels, because otherwise you're barely getting any firepower at all. Speed in this era won't matter. It's simply not going to be very interesting to use a lot of speed. Depending on what nation you start with in the campaign, your range will matter. Because currently we're looking at 3,300 kilometers. If you put on an air intake, provided that it fits, you're going to be able to boost that. Bloody hell. Look at that, we're getting to 4,800. And if you're able to update your engines eventually all the way to Diesel 2 or gas turbines, you're going to get a lot of range out of these ships. For now, early game, I just say keep it at standard. Don't put too much into it because it's going to ramp up your displacement quite quickly. As for primary and secondary towers, everything in this era that boosts your base accuracy is very, very welcome. So a Cage Mass 3, very welcome to have. Long range accuracy, if you can get any, great. But I'm generally quite skeptical about how much accuracy you're actually going to get out of these ships. I generally try and pick the best masts, even if they're heavier, because they're not heavier by that much, and they generally get a bunch more accuracy. Now keep in mind, the item on the left is not generally the best, because if you look at the stats of the medium Cage Mast 1, I get 1.5% or 1.5 points of base accuracy. Here I get 6. So Rear Tower 5 is, when it comes to accuracy, better. But it also weighs more. 312 tons versus 138. So this is a fairly sizable difference. And this is going to mean that your accuracy is coming at a greater cost. If we look at the main towers, we got the front tower 3 with 5 base accuracy or 2 base accuracy for the Cage Mast. So here too, you can make the case, okay, front tower has better base accuracy but less long range accuracy. It's 1890, I won't hit anything anyway. I'm going to go for the front tower because I want more base accuracy. Now at this point, we don't have a lot of options to boost the quality of our armor. This, for example, is going to give you more armor strength, but it also makes the armor a lot heavier. So in this situation, I would probably stick to the standard armor plate. And when it comes to a barbette, you basically only have one option. Stick with that. Don't try and upgrade anything of the others. Just make sure you have an underwater protected deck to protect the ship. Because a battleship is a sizable investment and you want to keep this thing alive. In the campaign, you won't have access to the sliders of cadets or cramped, but in this situation, I would generally go for a high crew as possible, if you have that slider in custom battles, and at least set the crew to standard quarters. The reason for having standard quarters is because this way you'll have a bit of, let's say, spare crew, and if you have cramped quarters, you're gonna have the exact number of crew that you need to do every task on the ship. The problem is, your ship will get hit. Your ship will take damage, and ships taking damage lose sailors. As you lose sailors, your stats will drop. Your accuracy is going to go down, your aims time is going to go down, your reload time is going to go up, and your damage control is going to go down. So your ability to extinguish fires, module repair, it's going to take a hit. If you have standard quarters or even spacious, then this is not as much of a problem. But with spacious, you are sacrificing more of your displacement for more quarters of the crew. And also, campaign-wise, if you're looking at your crew pool and it's not looking that good, like you don't have tens of thousands of sailors sitting around, I would generally go for standard quarters. This is generally good enough. Now for this 1890 ship, I want to go for a standard AP shell because I simply don't have anything else researched. The options that you will be getting eventually go from semi-armor piercing, which gives you less pen, but less chance to get a ricochet. Now let's say you're looking at a ship like this. The hull is a bit angled, and because of that, if a shell comes in and the armor is good enough, the shell is going to bounce off. Semi-armor piercing works in a way that doesn't do that as much. So you're less likely to really ding off the ship and not do any kind of damage. But the damage that you do, or the shell pen that you have, is less. So, especially against cruisers, this works really well. Especially against battleships, the Cat Ballistic tends to work really well because you get a lot more shell pen, but your ricochet angle also increases. So the chance that you're just going to bounce off is really quite high. That's why I tend to steer away from the Cat Ballistic too. I like to go capped or standard. If I know that this ship is going to be facing a lot of cruisers, I'll go semi. As for the rest, heavy shells and light shells give you the option of reloading faster and doing less damage, but you're gaining some accuracy. Heavy shells is the opposite way, and this is going to give you more shell damage, When you're firing high explosive shells, more chance to set fires, and it's going to give you more shell pen, but your reload will go up. So this trade-off, I would say try and get heavy shells early game. Early game being 1890. When it comes to your propellant and bursting charge, you don't get a lot of options yet, because you're going to have to research those. When it comes to reloading, always go for the better enhanced reload, because this means better DPS. If I have the standard reload, I'm looking at 117 seconds of reload, so that's almost 2 minutes. If I get the better enhanced reload system, I'm looking at 106 seconds. So per reload cycle, I save 11 seconds, and that means I can pump out more shells, and those extra shells might actually hit and do damage. So try and always get the best reloader. In order to get your guns on target, you're going to want to upgrade your hydraulic turret system. Ideally, you want to get all the way to Electro Hydro 3, because it means your turret traverse, so how quickly a turret will turn, is going to go up a lot. It is going to go up by 50%. There are some downsides. It is going to make the ship's guns heavier. It's going to make the engine heavier, because you're basically using the engine to turn the turrets as well. And you're going to have a greater chance of ship flaws, which is a whole different chapter, and I won't get into that right now. Now, when I'm facing an enemy battleship at this range, and I'm talking 1890, I'm thinking I won't hit them really beyond 5 kilometers. Let's have a look at what a 5 kilometer range gun can do. If I'm looking at AP pen, I'm looking at the second category at 5,000 meters. That's 25.4 inches of armor. That is under ideal circumstances. That's how much one of those shells can do, with the current propellant, the current shell charge. So if I can defend against something like 24, 22 inches of armor, that's enough, because the shell won't do that much damage then, and I'll be able to angle the ship, because that increases the thickness of the armor. Now, with the current armor type that I've selected, which is iron plate armor, I'm looking at an armor quality of minus 22%. So I won't actually get 11 inch, I'll get 11 inch minus 22% of that. So don't look at this and go, oh, this is fine. Always keep your armor quality in mind. Now, when I change this to compound armor, my ship's going to be too heavy. But I get a 38% armor quality bonus. So in this case, I would get 11 inch plus 38%. So that's about 15 inches of armor. That's a lot better, but the ship's too heavy. What can you do under these situations? Not much. You can try reducing the range of the ship, but you won't exactly get that done. You're going to need to research better engines, especially if you're starting in this era. You're going to need to do that quickly, because your engines are going to really depend, or really going to set the tone for how much horsepower per ton you use. So basically, a bigger, more powerful engine generates a lot more power for the same tonnage, which means your engine cannot weigh as much. It doesn't need to weigh as much. Anyway, whoop, no, I do want a Citadel. I want to go back to iron plate armor. Iron plate armor is just what you're going to start with. And as for armor, I always try to have some superstructure armor. The superstructure is the towers. It's the towers, the funnel, and the secondary tower. If these things get hit and penned, they could start taking damage. Especially if your front tower gets destroyed, you're going to be taking a hit to your accuracy. So always try and have at least some armor on the superstructure, and it is generally a bit harder to do, because this ramps up pretty quick. A superstructure armor of 2 inch, minus 22%, mind you, will at least protect you from some destroyers. As for secondary guns, I'm going to be using this battleship to fight other battleships. I might need it to fight the occasional heavy cruiser. Battle cruisers aren't a thing in 1890. Those hulls simply don't exist yet, they haven't been invented. So when it comes to secondary guns, I can go for a bunch of 6-inch guns to also make this thing viable against destroyers. Of course, as I'm doing this, I'm running into my weight issue again. So keep this in mind when you're building out the ship. Now there is one more thing that you can do with the guns, and this is going to depend on your tech level. This is to change the diameter of the guns as well as the length. Now the diameter is going to mean that with this you can go all the way up to plus 0.9, So I can make these guns essentially just shy of 13-inch guns, which will once again put their reload quite high at 128 seconds, so it will push them over that 2-minute limit that we had. And it's also going to mean that you do more damage and you have more pen. So have a look at the 5,000 meter range. I can now pen 28.5 inches. If I put this back to 0, I'm looking at 25 inches. So you're sacrificing reload in order to deal damage. Generally, considering the level of armor that you're going to have at this era, this age, I don't think you need this much. Now, when it comes to barrel length, this means that you're going to have a longer barrel. Currently, I don't have the tech yet to do anything with this, but a longer barrel means that you're going to have more pen, your shell's going to travel faster, and your reload is going to be longer, but your accuracy will be better. So your chance to hit something will be better, but the amount of shells that you throw at a target will be less. This is going to be a trade-off that's entirely up to you. You can go both ways with this. You can go with increasing it, ideally if you have the right tech, or you can go with decreasing it, all the way up to 20% negative. This is going to make these guns reload in a mere 62 seconds, but your accuracy and pen are really bad. Your pen just went from 25 to 17 inches at 5,000 meter range. So this is not a great weapon at current. I wouldn't use these. I generally never take off barrel length unless I'm building a really specialized ship. But this battleship wouldn't be that. Now, this is the battleship as I would generally build it in 1890. Let's skip a couple of eras and let's have a look at how a battleship in 1920 would look. Because you're going to be looking at different threats. You might now be facing battle cruisers, you might be facing heavy cruisers, destroyers, what have you. You have a lot of options. I'm going to go for the biggest hull, which is the Dreadnought 4 for the US. And this thing can go all the way up to 62,000 tons, which equates to about 5 times the battleship weight that we had a moment ago. And that was the minimum hull size of 11,000 for the US in 1890. Now, this hull and this era gives you a lot more options, because your accuracy is going to be a lot better, your speed is going to be potentially better, and your foes are going to be more numerous. You might be facing battleships. Let's say the enemy has a lot of battleships. Let's build a ship for that. You can see that when you hover over this hull, it says the optimal speed is 24.5 knots. If you go over that, then you're going to start to pay increasingly higher amounts of money as well as weight in order to get more speed. It is not worth it, generally. So I'm going to set this to 24 knots. This is going to give me the ability to still decide more or less when and where I fight and disengage if I so desire. Range, again, we're going to be using that later. This is something I didn't actually mention previous, but bulkheads always set these to maximum. A battleship is a pricey ship, and bulkheads reduce the chance of flooding. It does increase your ship's cost, it decreases your tonnage, but keeping your ship alive, I generally prefer much over having the ship eventually go down because of flooding. And look at what I'm saving. If I'm going to go for, let's say, minimum bulkheads, which is basically asking to get sunk, you're looking at 29,000 tons and 54 million. If you're going for maximum, you're paying 14 million more, and you're paying quite a lot of displacement more. You're going from 29 to 30, well, let's say 32, 33. But this is going to keep your ship alive. If I would have to rebuild a ship like this, it's going to cost me 54 million at least, and that's without any superstructure and guns. Saving this one and repairing it is generally going to be cheaper. Alright, once it comes to beam and draft, and I didn't cover these before either because in 1890 it's really not that beneficial to do anything about them. Beam and draft affect the ship's maneuverability. The beam makes the ship wider. It just means that the ship is going to be either really sleek or really wide. Now, what you do with this slider depends on how well the ship is going to behave as a firing platform. A ship with a low beam is going to be more wobbly sideways. So it doesn't have a lot of displacement, it doesn't have a lot of width, and because of that it's going to be rolling over the side. That's going to make the ship less stable as a firing platform, and because of that you have less accuracy. The opposite side, you might argue, is the best. Well, not necessarily. Because a high beam does make you more stable. It does also have an increased displacement. And if you look at what the cost does, we're going from 68 million to 80 million. Because you suddenly have a lot more ship. You're also a bigger target. In the case of a battleship, you might not mind because you might be able to armor it up. But all of this width, all of this weight is going to have to get moved through the water. And that's the final part of the tooltip. It's going to require substantially more horsepower to achieve a reasonable speed. So the amount of displacement relative to what you're going to be using when you have either zero beam or less is going to be a lot more. Because a sleeker ship like this has less water resistance. It's more likely to sail through the water nicely and quickly. Now this is going to be ideally the first part where you go, okay, what sort of battleship am I going to use? What sort of foes am I going to face? Because that is always question one. What's the foe? What's the target? What's the objective? In the case where you're facing enemy battleships, I would say make yourself a stable firing platform. Make yourself a nice wide battleship and fight the enemy battleships at range. If you, however, are facing a lot of cruisers, well, you could argue a battleship isn't the right platform to go after them in the first place, but let's say that you have to. I'll probably go for a sleeker ship. This is going to allow me to get up to higher speeds without sacrificing too much of my engine power. And I don't need guns to be as big. Because while I can put guns of 16-inch on this ship, if I'm facing a cruiser, I don't want a reload of 226 seconds. That's almost 4 minutes. I want a shorter reload and relatively smaller guns. So something like an 11-inch gun, and you can see that this is the Mark III, is going to have a reload of only 72 seconds. Which means that this thing cranks out 3 times the shells, or 3 times the salvos, relative to the 16-incher. If you're facing battleships, go for something larger. If you're facing cruisers, even battle cruisers, potentially go for something smaller. This is going to impact the beam. Draft is the height of the hull. Now, this is going to mean, am I a big target or not? And this also affects the stability and resistance against the ships, or against hits. You can also see what these stats do over here on the far right. Over here with ship details, the bottom column says what the draft does, and it's a lot. A lot changes when you start moving these dials. So let's say I put this to 0. My draft doesn't get any benefits or debuffs currently. If I switch this all the way to top, you're going to be seeing that I get a higher speed at maximum turn rate. My rudder's going to shift faster. I have 35% more operational range, which is really nice. But when I'm maneuvering, so when I'm turning the ship, I'm going to be sacrificing 20% accuracy. My accuracy penalty is far greater. My accuracy penalty from standard waves is worse, and my base accuracy is worse. Now, why is that? Imagine that the taller the ship's going to get, and it's still rolling side to side. If you have a fairly low platform like this, it doesn't roll very much. It's going to roll a little bit to that side and a little bit to that side. If you have a really tall target like this, it's going to roll a lot to one side and then a lot to the other side. And that means that your base accuracy is going to suffer. Does that mean lower draft is always better? Well, no. Because at this point, if you're just cruising around, you're going to have an accuracy bonus. And whereas my operational range at higher draft was better, right now it's not so much better. I'm sacrificing operational range because I cannot stash enough fuel onto this ship. So that's what those two sliders do. Now, let's configure this thing in 2 different options. First is going to be an anti-battleship weapon. The second is going to be an anti-cruiser weapon. I'm going to go for the best towers, which are the Tall Advanced Tower. That's 31.5 base accuracy. You also have this one. This is 25. This is more 45 long accuracy. Oh, sorry, no, this one's better. Generally, the heaviest towers I prefer. I'm going to put these fairly close together, but these towers do not come with a slot for funnels, so keep a little bit of room to put a funnel system in. Let's go with a fairly tall funnel. And this is going to give me only 30% engine efficiency, but we can still tweak that. I'm going to go for the best oil. I'm going to go for the best engines, which in this case I think are steam turbines, geared steam turbines. These ones are very interesting to use, but bloody expensive. These things give you a 4,000 engine cost modifier per weight. These things 9,000. So look at what happens to the price. We're now paying 90 million with turbines. We're paying 98 million with geared turbines. If I go to electrics, turbo electrics, I'm paying 183 million. So that's suddenly a double relative to what you actually paid before. Why are those things so expensive? Well, they allow you more fuel efficiency, so you can get farther with the same type of fuel. They also allow you to start and stop faster. Your acceleration is 200% higher, which isn't necessarily something you want on a battleship, but on a destroyer, that might be very useful. Because it's going to allow you to use your speed to your advantage. It's going to allow you to zigzag, it's going to allow you to throw the ship into a turn. You get options. Let's go for geared turbines. Since it's now 1920, we also have access to different types of engines. Auxiliary engines gives you bonuses, but also some penalties. The bonuses are very interesting. Ship repair, engine repair, and water pumping. So, ship repair and engine repair make sure that the ship gets underway again faster, especially if your engines are down. Water pumping allows you to deal with flooding more efficiently. The downside is that your engine cost is going up. Your engine cost is going up by 25%, and the higher tier of engine you get, the worse this becomes. So we're going from 25 engine cost per weight to 50 to 200. But this does mean that I get a 40% bonus to ship repair, 50% bonus to engine repair, and 30% bonus to water pumping. And whereas with these, with Aux 1, you get a bit better rudder shift, so how fast your rudder changes, a bit better turret traverse. With this, you get substantially faster rudder traverse. Turning rate, the turret traverse is better, so how fast your turrets turn. But it does take up weight on the ship, and that tends to not add up very much when it comes to these auxiliary engines, but your cost could be a factor. Propeller shaft is, I'd say, somewhat optional. I tend to go for the best ships, the most advanced ships, so I want the advanced propeller shaft to get better acceleration and better turning rate. Turning rate so I can swing the ship around if the threat materializes somewhere else. And it kind of doesn't matter if I'm facing a battleship or a heavy cruiser or a destroyer. I want the ship to be able to turn very quickly. Now this one is interesting. How is your rudder placed? Do you want a balanced rudder that gives you a faster speed while you're turning, but the whole turn itself takes longer? Let me show you what the stats do. The turning speed is less. Because with this, you get less or more sustained speed while turning. So I'm looking at less turning speed loss. Because as your ship is turning direction, as it's changing direction, you're going to be taking on a bit more water resistance, so your turning rate drops. Oh, sorry, your speed drops in the turn. If you go for a semi-balanced rudder, that turning speed drops even more, so I'm losing more speed, but my turning circle is smaller, my turning rate is higher. I do not turn, or I do not keep enough speed or as much speed, but I do turn faster. And the last one is unbalanced, which goes all the way in the other direction. You have the potential to lose a lot of speed in a turn, but your turn circle is quite low, so you can turn the ship very quickly, and your turning rate is really good. Now, if you have a smaller ship and you have a lot of money, then in this situation, the turbo-electric drive would be really nice to have. Because you might be losing a lot of speed in the turn, but your 200% acceleration bonus is going to mean that it doesn't matter that much. Very, very quickly, you'll be right up to speed again. In this case, however, it's going to be really expensive, and I generally like to try and keep my battleship as safe as possible without making it excessively expensive, so I prefer an unbalanced rudder. I'll take the hit to my ability to maintain speed, and I'll slow by turning, but that's generally good, because if I'm turning, I'm generally dodging torpedoes, which means that slowing down is another factor that will throw off the torpedo solution. Finally, how quickly does your rudder turn? That's impacted by steam steering gear or all the way up to electro-hydraulic steering gear 2. I tend to go for the best one, again, because I want to get the best rudder shift to try and push my turning circle down as low as possible. But again, you're losing turning speed because of this upgrade. Protection, try to get the best. Even if it's most expensive, I like to keep my ship safe. And the difference from Group 2 to Group 4 in this case is going to mean that my armor weight is less, but my armor strength gets a nice bonus. So in this case, we get a 95% armor strength, which means you get, let's say, 10 inches of armor plus 95%. Means you get 19.5 inches of effective armor. If I go for Group 4, that goes to a 120% bonus. So we're now looking at 22 inches of armor. You are going to be paying the price for that. Your expenses go from 109 million to 123 million. A higher quality of armor does take more money. Anti-torpedo blister is now a factor that you didn't have before, and it's basically bulges on the side of the ship that make sure that a torpedo doesn't hit as hard. This is going to depend how you build out your ship. What's your foe? What's your target? What's your threat? Are you expecting a lot of torpedoes? Bring a better torpedo resistance. Because eventually you'll be able to have anti-torp 5, and your torpedo damage reduction is 60%. So if you get hit by a torpedo, that's only going to do 60% or 40% of its top amount of damage possible. And that's only taking this factor into account, but there are others. If you're not expecting torpedoes at all, if you're just expecting to have this thing fight at range, and you have an escorting group of ships around it, then you don't necessarily need an anti-torpedo system. Although, for what this costs, I generally take at least one. Because that still means I get a 20% damage reduction in torpedo hits at a little bit of cost, but not much. It's going to cost me about $1 million. When it comes to displacement, it's going to cost you, what, 1,400? No, not even. It's going to cost you 1,100 tons, and I think that's a really good price to pay for 20% damage reduction. The other factors that you have over here is how many hulls you have. Now, you're not going to get a catamaran or a trimaran, but you'll have an outer hull, then a secondary hull, and a tertiary hull. This, however, makes your ship really quite heavy, and that means you're going to pay a lot more. Your hull weight goes up, your hull cost goes up, your ship construction time goes up by 10%. But this, in tandem with anti-torp 3, can make you almost invulnerable to torpedoes. This is going to reduce the damage that a torpedo does, and it reduces the torpedo flooding chance by 30%. This one reduces torpedo flooding chance by another 30%. I'm not sure if those are additive or multiplicative. So if it's 30% plus 30%, or if they factor into each other. And it's going to give you more hull resistance, but again, it's going to make you also a more expensive ship. Bulkheads. What do these do? Reinforced bulkheads and watertight doors, I'm not sure why these aren't standard on a ship, means that some part of the ship that gets damaged doesn't necessarily spread out to the next compartment. So your ability to divide the ships into sectors and then contain a damaged part to that sector is improving. Especially useful in the case of firefighting and flooding. So in this case, I generally bring watertight doors and reinforced bulkheads, so that's reinforced bulkheads too. Anti-flooding system, the best that you can get. Always bring the best. You want the water on the outside of the ship, you don't want the water on the inside of the ship. This is not even a question for me. When it comes to citadels, you have a couple of options. We used to only have Citadel 1, it's now considered obsolete because we have better options. You have 3 options here. You get the Advanced Armored Citadel, you have the Turtleback Armor Scheme, or you have Citadel 5, which is all or nothing. These 3 have vastly different values. Let me show you. The resistance of the Citadel, so flat out resistance, is how much damage, basically how much damage resistance you have, so how much flat damage modifier you're going to have. Damage reduction modifier, that is. 6.5% here, 15% here, 7.5% here. Does that make this better? Not necessarily, because this tends to also make the ship quite heavy. This goes with the philosophy that you're placing layers of sloped armor behind the main belt and above the citadel being the part where all the machinery sits and where the turrets stick down into the ship. You're armoring up a lot of parts of the ship. It's also going to impact what citadel armor you can set, because if I go for this one, I don't even have this other layer of belt, whereas if I do, I'm going to get a second inner belt layer. So you're layering armor on armor on armor. Just imagine a turtle wearing body armor. That's basically this. Does that mean it's better? Not necessarily, because it is really heavy, and it is, because of that, also a bit expensive. You get a 22% armor strength modifier, so that's also a factor to consider. Over here it's 130, combined with the other factors. Now it's 142, and now it's 138. So, again, Turtleback does seem like the better option. But Citadel allows you to have... Citadel 5, which is the all-or-nothing armor scheme, gets you more resistance, it gets you more armor strength, it gets you less engine damage chance. Huh, that's useful. Over here it's 20%, over here it's 55%. More importantly, you're also protecting your vitals, such as your magazine, a lot better. So your ammo detonation chance goes from 30% less to 60% less. Now keep in mind, it doesn't completely negate it, but it is definitely a modifier. The same for flash fires. Flash fire is when a turret explodes, and that can spread. So let's say I have, let's put a barbette down. Let's say I have an 11-inch gun over there and over here. This turret faces a flash fire, so it pops off the ship and does dramatic amounts of damage. Your flash fire spreading chance indicates how quickly or how likely it is to spread over to the other turret. So you want that chance to be as low as possible. Otherwise, you're going to find that your ship happens to blow up. And especially earlier game, like 1910, 1920. Well, not strictly 1920, but it can happen in 1920. Early game, let's say around 1900s, it is entirely likely that you're going to see ships with 10, 20, 30, 40 flash fires. Because they tend to have a lot of smaller guns, and especially light cruisers are susceptible. I've seen light cruisers which had 8, 9, 10 flash fires because all their turrets popped off the deck one by one by one. So if you can negate that, by all means. Now by placing a barbette on the ship, which is basically this little part that allows you to put another turret in a higher position, you're also unlocking barbette thickness. And again, this is going to be very important. Barbette 1 to Barbette 4 are available, Barbette 5 requires higher tech, which you will unlock with time or by going to a later era. Barbette's thickness and anti-flash protection means that your flash fire explosion chance is less, and your flash fire spreading chance is less. So having flash fire 4 or Barbette 4 in tandem with all or nothing armor scheme means that you are far less likely to have this thing blow up. When it comes to the armament, we basically have the same options as before. And if I would be building this thing out as I initially set out to do as an let's say an anti-cruiser battleship, I'm going to be using a couple of 12-inch main guns. Now in this case, you could argue why 3-inch, why 2-inch? I would beg that it's more a personal preference rather than a sheerly statistical one. Double barrel tends to be more accurate than triple barrel. If you look at, let's say, 10,000 meter range, this triple barrel gives you 5.8% accuracy. The dual barrel gives you 6.8. Does that matter? Maybe, but you're throwing out 3 shells, and here you're throwing out 2. So you could argue that the triple barrel makes up for it with a better volume of fire, but your actual ability to hit the target is not necessarily that much better. I would like to be able to throw out let's say an evenly number of shells, and I don't mean it has to be 2, 4, 6, or 8. I prefer dual barrel over triples unless we're talking later tech. When it comes to your shells, again, I'm facing a cruiser, I want to use semi-armor piercing. Because with, let's say, 10,000 meter range is where I might be able to hit, and I can now pen 16 inches of armor, and that's quite good. That's with the standard bursting charge. If I want to do more shell pen, and in this case that's very welcome, you can go for the TNT-3. If you want to get more high explosive damage, you can go for picric acid, but it's a different discussion on how to kill ships. Cordite is your propellant, and this is going to impact your shell pen. Now ideally, the higher it goes, the better it is, so again, flash fire chance reduction and also shell pen increase, giving me already at 10,000 meter range 16.5 inches of pen. That's quite nice. I just want to make sure though that this battleship actually uses those semi-armor piercing shells, and that's where this loadout comes in. So I want to have a standard ratio. When it comes to your type of HE shells, which is basically what you fire when you cannot damage anything else, this can be imagined as a scale that goes from I'm going to set a lot of fires to I'm going to do a lot of damage. Fires are damage over time, and by setting enough fires on the ship, you will not immediately burn it down. You might burn it down, and you might be able to overwhelm the enemy damage control parties by setting so many fires that they will not be able to put them all out, and the ship will burn down. That is extensive fire overwhelm, and that means the ship is dead. The alternative option is CPBC, and this is the other side of the spectrum. Everything else is basically underlying or somewhere in between. This is going to give you a lot more HE shell pen. So if you look at my stats now at 10,000 meter range, I get 0.2 inches of armor pen if I'm facing the belt, so the flat side of the ship. So that's 0.2. If I go for capped ballistic at 10,000 meter range, that now jumps to 5.2. Which means that I might be able to deliver a fairly hefty blow with armor piercing. And if that turns out to be maybe too much, because the ship doesn't have that much armor, you can easily pen it using HE, if it's a cruiser. It doesn't necessarily work against a battleship. It doesn't necessarily work. Now, when it comes to these shells, in this case, when I'm hunting cruisers, I probably go somewhere in the middle, base fuse. This is going to allow you to kill cruisers pretty quick. It's going to allow you to almost one-shot a destroyer, depending on how much damage you do. It'll not be as good when setting fires. Keep that in mind. A couple of additional equipments. Always get the best auto-loaders, or the best loaders, and the best turret rotation systems, because this is going to allow my turrets to swing around quickly. And especially as I'm building a battleship that's facing cruisers, I want this thing to be able to turn quickly. Next up, equipment. I would personally go, in this case, for gun base accuracy. Cruisers tend to be more difficult to hit, and that means I want more flat-out accuracy. This is going to give you more long-range accuracy, and if you were, as I previously discussed, building a ship that's more of a sniper, more of a long-range fighter, take the stereoscopic rangefinder and forego the torpedo protection. You don't need as much. In this case, I want a coincidence rangefinder because my guns aim faster. Note, they aim faster, not the turret turns faster. The guns are more likely to start acquiring the target faster and figure out what their range is. So coincidence. Acoustics. How good are you detecting torpedoes? Keep in mind, you might not necessarily be the target of a torpedo, but you can still get hit by that torpedo. If you have a couple of destroyers screening for your group, or for your battleship in this case, and you find that the destroyer was taking a torpedo, the torpedo did not hit the destroyer and passed the destroyer, it might still have enough range to hit your battleship. That's dangerous. So in this case, a hydrophone station could be useful. Again, if you're sniping, I would go for a lower end hydrophone station because it still gives you a bit of torpedo warning, but not as much. If you're going to go very, very close to the enemy, like this thing might do, because it is designed to hunt cruisers, I would go for the best acoustics that you can get. Eventually you'll unlock sonar, which will give you a lot more torpedo spotting. This is 65, this is 175%. Radio, a bit contentious, because communications range is going to give your flagship a bonus to other ships around it, and the better the radio on the flagship, the better the accuracy of the other ships, or the bigger the circle of impact that you have. It is, however, fairly heavy. Well, it used to be. It isn't anymore. I guess they changed that. RDF is basically the bonus to that. And if you do not have a radar, I would recommend that you get a radio direction finder. Because if you don't know where the enemy is, you will see a sort of indicator that points towards where you're detecting radio signals from. Note, not radar, but radio signals. So that's where the enemy could be. When it comes to armor, if I'm building a ship that's facing enemy cruisers, I won't need that much. So I'd say about 12 inches should be sufficient to deal with most of what the enemy ship is going to throw at me. When it comes to a forebelt, you will want to look at what sort of forebelt you're protecting. When I'm looking at the current armor scheme, which is all or nothing, you can see that my citadel, that's the darker gray part, or red, I don't know, I'm colorblind. Anyway, you got this small box here, that's your engineering. That's where your engines are. And then you got the rest of the part, that's where your main belt starts and stops. So the forebelt is only the part in front of that towards the bow. The aft belt is the rest. The same for foredeck and aft deck. This is the this is the foredeck, this is the aft deck. When it comes to conning tower and superstructure, again, always have some, especially on the conning tower, because this is going to mean, can I still survive a hit? Or is my conning tower going to get blown off and will I lose my accuracy? So I tend to over-invest on armor on that. Forebelt doesn't need to be that much. Aft belt doesn't need to be that much. Main deck doesn't need to be that much, because I'm going to be trying and facing the enemy at 10,000 meter range, which is generally more likely to start seeing direct belt hits, not deck hits. So I think when I'm facing main deck, I'd say 7 inches is fine, probably be a bit too much. And then when it comes to inner, I'm not really sure. I don't use these very often to fine-tune the ship. I would put a bit more on belt armor than deck. And what these things basically do is when this thing gets hit, at least 50% of the shell's pen power is lost before hitting this. So a shell hits the main belt, it's going to try and pen 12 inches. If it does that, it will have lost some of its energy to pen. And it might be able to only pen, I don't know, 6 inches. And this is going to try and stop it again. If it pens that, it's going to stop at the second layer. If it's still going, it might get caught by the third. And then it hopefully stops before it hits something critical inside the ship. Now, we still have 10,000 tons left on this ship. So in this case, when I'm hunting cruisers, I also want something that can kill cruisers, ideally fairly quickly. An 8-inch triple barrel turret or an 8-inch double barrel turret could be a very nice asset to have. But keep in mind where you put these things down. Because in this situation, if I put my secondary turrets down here, this gun turret is going to have less range to maneuver. It will not be able to turn all the way like there, where it normally would. So do take care where you put your secondary turrets. When it comes to barrel length, by the way, in this case I would keep it at 0 for the main guns, because I still want to have that pretty nice reload of 50 seconds. But for the secondaries, I want them to give as much range as possible. They currently have 12 kilometer range. But by giving them longer barrels, they'll also have more accuracy. So right now you're seeing an accuracy of 2.6 to 2.3%. I'm going to boost this as much as I can. And at 15%, I get 4% to 3.8. So we get more accuracy. That's nice. That's really nice. But you are sacrificing reload, which puts the reload at 25 seconds, as opposed to what it was just now, which was about 18 seconds. But I'd gladly sacrifice about 50% to gain a bit of accuracy. When it comes to your other options on this ship, you also have casemates. And I would basically plunk this thing full of casemates, so that I have a bunch of extra firepower. You can even put them over there and over here. Keep in mind, this one is, well, you'd argue is going to get limited by this turret, but apparently it doesn't seem to care that the turret's there, even though they're occupying the same space on the deck. So that's a bit of a bug that might be worked out. Further secondary weaponry, I'd say something like 3 inchers in case you happen to get a destroyer that comes really close, because these things fire every 2.3 seconds. But in this case, I only have slots over there and over there. That's casemates. Secondaries, I would put 3-inchers and I would just throw out as many shells as I can. So just use 3-inchers on spots where you might still have room, where they don't interfere with other guns. So in this case, this spot doesn't interfere with the primary turret too much, while still giving me some firepower there. When it comes to the stern, we don't really have that luxury. So the stern is going to be slightly less protected. Now that means I still have 6,000 tons worth of ship. What am I going to do with all of that? Well, that's up to you. You could go with, for example, having forced engines, so you get more engine efficiency, and with that you get more speed, or you get more range. You could try and get more speed, so that you're maybe more likely to catch up to a cruiser, but keep in mind that as you increase speed, your ship will get substantially more expensive, especially after you cross a certain threshold, and also you're going to be facing engine efficiency issues. Because now that you're going faster, you need a bigger engine, and that bigger engine is going to need more oxygen, so more funnel capacity, and because of that, you're going to need more funnels. So keep this in mind as a trade-off. Now this video is turning into a really long bit, so let's move on to a new design, and this one is going to be fighting battleships. The previous one that I had should have been actually minimum beam to make it better at maneuvering. This one is going to be the sniper build. So how would I put that up? I would not make it faster than 24 knots. I would still give it the best oil and, let's say, balanced boilers, gear turbines, aux 3. In this case, a balanced rudder because I want to maintain speed. Shaft 3, still pretty good steering. Best armor that I can buy, best armor type. Not as much torpedo protection, but still some. Triple hull. Resistance bulkheads, Citadel 5. To reduce that flash fire chance and ammo detonation chance. And let's go with a really good tower for long range firepower. Secondary tower, long range firepower. I can still max out the displacement. And this is going to give me a really nice firing platform. I'm going to go with the tall funnel once again. Now, if you really want to, you can go and calculate how much smoke interference per ton you're getting and how much funnel capacity. I generally don't care that much about it. I might be able to do better with the ship design, but whatever. It works for me, generally. Main guns. I'm facing a battleship. I want something that's capable of dealing with a big ship, with a big threat in an efficient manner. And ideally at range. So let's go with a standard barbette. Standard superimposed barbette there. And, well, maybe not there. I don't think I need it on the stern. Main guns. Ideally, I'd take something that's beyond Mark 1. Because they just reload faster. Their accuracy is better. They tend to just do more damage over time. So in this case, a 14-inch gun. And we're going to go with double barrels. Double barrel does not fit over there, but that's not necessarily bad. Because while you might be designing a ship for a certain threat, that doesn't mean that that's the only threat that you're going to face. You might still have a cruiser or the occasional destroyer come into range, so be careful and be prepared. So in this case, I'm going to put an 8-inch triple turret on here, so that if a cruiser gets too close, I will still be able to whack it over the head with a couple of 8-inch shells. When it comes to the secondary guns, I'll probably still bring a couple of 3-inchers just to be able to annoy those destroyers that get too close. But in this era, really, if a destroyer is able to make it to a range of 9 kilometers or less, you're probably already getting attacked by torpedoes. So you're probably already going to have a bad time. When it comes to casemates, I probably wouldn't bring too many when I'm fighting another battleship or when I'm making a strict anti-battleship ship. Because at this point, my 8-inch gun won't do too much, but it does still weigh quite a bit. It weighs 129 tons, and I could still use that somewhere else. We're gonna go for a stereoscopic rangefinder to maximize gun range and accuracy. RDF and acoustics, minimum. Electrical turrets I've already upgraded, semi-auto loader turrets. When it comes to the shells, we're firing super heavy shells. This is gonna give me more shell damage and more shell pen. And with capped shells, capped AP shells, these things will do a lot of pen. potentially too much. They might actually do more damage than I strictly need. They might do more pen. When that happens, you get an overpen. So essentially a shell flies in one side and still has so much energy that it flies right out the other. Arguably that should cause flooding, but generally it doesn't. So an overpen means that you basically have too much firepower on a gun and you're too strong. When this happens, when you find that your ship is too good at fighting other ships, you can reduce the type of shell from, let's say, capped to maybe semi-ballistic. And now at 10,000 meter range, or let's say 15,000 meter range, I'm able to pen a maximum of 22 inches, rounded up, 21.9. This could be better standard shells. 15,000 meter range, 31 inches of armor pen. That'll be ideally sufficient to deal with most armors. But keep in mind, my ship has 12 inches of armor plus 138, so my main belt is really substantial. It is really quite heavily armored, and I have 10,000 tons to still put additional armor on this ship. Which, if I'm facing a ship that's going to be fighting the enemy at longer ranges, I will make use of that. I will definitely make use of that in favor of having the ship survive. Let's say survive over having more firepower on the ship. Superstructure, 3 inches. Conning tower is going to go to 24 inches because I'm concerned that my accuracy will be dramatically decreased when my conning tower gets destroyed. Whereas if my previous design, the one facing cruisers, is going to be facing a cruiser, it's not that likely to lose its conning tower. It's possible, it's not that likely, because the guns are smaller. When it comes to HE shells, these guns don't fire very quickly anyway. They fire every 50 seconds. But that is without the barrel length that I'm going to give them, because I want to be able to reach out and touch the target. Now, the 15-inch guns weren't very good. They were Mark 1. My 14-inch guns are Mark 3, and I still want to climb up to 15-inch. So I'm going to go and say 14.9-inch guns, which now puts my reload at 76 seconds. But they're going to be accurate. With this 15% length, these guns are going to be accurate. And with the amount of damage that they can do, they will hit hard. But, going back to the HE shells, I do want to make sure that these things don't try and set that many fires, because I don't expect them to be needed for that particular role. If, for some reason, this ship, with its 40 inches of pen that we're now at, is unable to pen the target, I might be able to pen it with high explosive. So let's go for capped ballistic and see what that does. It's going to give me 7 inches of armor. Armor pen, that is. And your chance to deflect with HE is far, far, far less. So your chance that high explosive shells ricochet off the target is almost none. That means that this 3-inch superstructure wouldn't protect this ship from itself. It is not sufficient. I can blow away the conning tower and every other part of the superstructure with high explosive if my main shells are too good. So in this situation, I would probably go with capped ballistic HE shells because I'm not trying to set fires, but I will want to be able to just blap smaller ships. Because look at that pen. 15,000 meter range, 7-inch pen. That should be enough to wipe out a destroyer in one shot, considering that my HE damage is 3,281. Don't stick too much to those numbers because they're inaccurate. I've seen a ship get hit for 31,000 points of damage with a shell really quite similar to this, so don't stick too much to those numbers. Now, something that I do need to keep an eye on is my 4 weight offset. Whenever one of these numbers turns into a different color than this, you need to start paying attention. What the game is telling me now is saying, hey dude, your ship is a bit heavier on the bow than it is on the stern, and that's going to give you an issue. It's going to give you less base accuracy, it's going to give you more accuracy penalty from waves, so try and balance your ship out. Keep in mind though, as I am moving the turret on the stern, look at what the picture here is doing. My citadel, my main armor belt are going to increase. If I put the turret all the way over there, then that means that that turret's magazine is going to sit all the way down there, right below it, and that means that the entire main belt is going to protect the ship from there all the way to there. If I pull it all the way back, I suddenly have a lot more displacement because I don't need to armor up this whole section of the ship. So if you're looking at a 4 weight offset issue, try and move everything back just a bit and see if that fixes the issue. Because generally, it will. Generally, this is going to make it far easier to balance your ship out. And there we go. Perfectly balanced, no fore or stern weight offset. This is how I would build a ship for anti-cruiser warfare, and this is the one that's going to do anti-battleship warfare. Is this the end-all be-all of battleships? No, absolutely not. You can still change this thing to face your exact threat level. If you find in your campaign, for example, that your 14-inch 0.9 or 14.9-inch guns won't cut it, upgrade to 16s. Just try and get a higher tier of these 16-inch guns. Alright, this video turned into a far longer monologue than I'd expected. I hope you found it useful. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comment section. And if you have any questions, by all means, post them down below. Keep in mind that the game is in early access, and that means that your version might be different. And with that version difference, you might also have stat differences. So always correct or always try and have a look at what I'm looking at and whether those stats are still the same for you. Hope you found the video useful. If you did, please hit like so more people can find it. If you have any questions, post them down below. And otherwise, I'll see you soon for more videos.